First, let me tell you, I feel so much better than I felt last week. And so thank you for prayers. And I'm going to see somebody come Tuesday and maybe get another hint or two how to go forward with this stuff. Feel better yet. So today feels a little bit strange. This is Palm Sunday. Palm Sunday time when, on our church calendar, what church calendar we have, we remember Jesus coming into Jerusalem for his last time. And then it's next week we would study crucifixion and resurrection. But what we've got with our calendar like it is, we're not going to have class next week. We're going to have a time after our worship where we can just come together and chat, and love on each other a little bit. And the next week is when we'll do resurrection. And today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the crucifixion and more than that, the trial. I was trying to figure how can we talk about this in a fresh way that helps us all in our life as Christians. How do we talk about the crucifixion of Jesus in a way that would be uplifting to us and would help us all grow? So many of you all have grown up in the same tradition that I've been a part of. And so, every single week, our tradition is to participate in the Lord's Supper. And as such, we take the bread, we take the wine. In doing that, we remember Jesus and we remember Jesus' death. And we think about the implications of that death for us, okay? And for me at least, there are two great thoughts, implications that I see in Christ's crucifixion. And the first is you simply can't separate Jesus' crucifixion from the time which was the Passover. Right? I mean, it's the Passover. And so the business of Jesus being the lamb, of Jesus being a Passover lamb, the means through whom we have forgiveness of our sins, that can't be dismissed. But the second thing that I try to think about is what I'll call the ultimate gift. Many of us, we talk about our soldiers who have been in the military who paid the ultimate price, which was death. It was their death. They gave their lives, okay? And, I think about that, and that is I suppose the ultimate sacrifice that we can make. But then I think about the sacrifice that Jesus made, which were people everywhere, people that didn't even love him, people that weren't born yet, people that, for us, right? I mean, he paid the ultimate sacrifice. And as if that's not enough, when we're asked to follow Jesus, we're asked that we would live that life ourselves. That part of taking up that yoke is that we too would bear his cross, would bear our own cross. And in so doing, that we would give up ourselves for one another. Correct? Is that right? I'll tell you, it's really easy. It's really easy, and for me, having children, having had grandchildren, and being older, it's absolutely simple for me to imagine, and it is, and I say simple, I mean this. It would be simple and easy for me give up my life for one of my children. Does anybody have children in here that you would not do that for? Now, when I say easy, it's not like, and I want to, hey, come on, let's have it happen or anything, but yeah, yes.
It's very much more easy to think about it if you've got a child, adult child, that is chronically ill, like Ryan.
Yeah.
To think, if I could do this,
Yeah.
I would take it away from him.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. All of us would do that. And when I look around the room, I'm thinking most of you I would.
Except for me, right?
You know, we start, that's where it starts getting harder, isn't it? And then we start talking about people that we don't know, or let's just take another step, people that we don't like. And the thought of giving up our lives for them, wow, that's just beyond. Yeah.
I can remember I fought in 3 wars, Vietnam War, Korean War, and World War II.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that.
Give me right up for, you know.
Yeah. So he was ready. So, John, when I start reading John, reading it through night before last and then last night, I kept wanting to add to John, because the three synoptics in John all talk about the crucifixion, and they all have information in there. And we can compile an incredible amount of information about from the time Jesus is arrested to the time he's crucified. But John, when you read through John, if you've read that, there's things there that are fresh, and there's a whole lot that's left out. Let me think just for a moment. With John, Peter gets disturbed, and Peter pulls out his sword or a little knife, and what does he do with it?
Cut the ear off.
He cuts off the ear of a guy named
Malchus.
Now, I believe it's in Matthew. Jesus sticks that ear back on there. Okay? John doesn't say anything about that. John is really big on the interrogation of Jesus, and that's something that I really get out of this. Trying to read John, and what John has to say about Jesus' interrogation. It's as if Jesus is in charge the entire time. John depicts that. It's not like they come to get Jesus and drag Jesus off and Jesus is fighting his way. It's like Jesus is large in charge. And when he goes before Annas, and he goes in front of 2 high priests. That's a little bit of an interesting thing. The first one is Annas. Annas is, I think it says, the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who is the high priest. How is that? Well, Annas, high priest, gets fired when Pilate comes in, and they replace him with Caiaphas. Right? Caiaphas was the high priest back earlier in the book that said, when they were trying to talk about how to deal with Jesus, Caiaphas basically says it's better that one person dies so that the people can be saved. Okay? What's he talking about? He ain't talking. It's like he's revealing all these occasions, these people reveal truth, but they're not even sure. They don't know that they're revealing truth. It's like, despite their evil intent, truth is still being given. And I just for a moment, I just want to read through a part of this, because I think it'll give us a better handle on what John's trying to do. We're in John 18 and 19. That's where we are. And it'd be helpful probably if you turn to it. You've got something. John 18. So Jesus has just he's talked to his disciples. And has anybody here been to Jerusalem before? You been there? Okay. So look here. So you've got, so here's Jerusalem, and you've got the temple right in here, and there's this rift that's called the Kidron Valley. And just on the other side of the Kidron Valley, you've got all these, you've got trees growing in there. Those trees are, what kind of trees are those?
Olive.
Huh?
Olive.
Yep, it's an olive grove. And they're still, today, they're planting some olives over there, all right? So they've got, and they refer to it as a garden, but it's not a garden like we think. It's not like they got a row of carrots or whatever. It's they've got a grove of olive trees. So you go down this gulch and come on up, all right? And they're there praying, getting ready to, and then here comes this group. Here comes this group of guys up there, and it's a commingling. They're Roman soldiers, and there are officials or muscle men for the Sanhedrin. So it's a mix of the two. Now, right off the bat, if there's Roman soldiers that are there as a group of it, who is behind that? Just throw that out. If there's Roman soldiers there, who's behind it? Who? Huh? Yeah, so Pilate's got a, right now, the inference is Pilate kind of knows what's going on, or somebody close to Pilate knows. Otherwise, Roman soldiers wouldn't be there. So you've got Roman soldiers that are there, and you've got Jewish folks that are working for the Sanhedrin there. And then you've also got Judas. Judas is there. And interestingly enough, you know, in the synoptics, you've got Judas kissing Jesus. That's kind of the mark of this is who Jesus is. Now John leaves that out. This group comes in there. They've got their torches and lanterns. It's nighttime. And John depicts Jesus as stepping up. And he basically says, and this is in verse 4, he says, whom do you seek? Jesus, it doesn't look like he waits. He says, so Jesus, knowing all the things that were coming upon him, went forth and said to them, who you guys after? All right? Hi, how are you? Who are you after? They answered, Jesus the Nazarene. I don't know the significance of that. Jesus the Nazarene is a title given to Jesus that John uses about 3 times. This is the second time. Jesus the Nazarene, he said to them, I am he. Now, what's this about the language, I am he? Anything there? Does that ring a bell? You hear that, I am? All right. Now, you remember we've had 7 I ams already. Jesus has taught, I am. And the significance of the I am language goes all the way back to Old Testament usage, all right, where God says, and he's with Moses, I am the I am, right? So Jesus is using this God language that is reserved for God. I am he. And when he says that, the Jewish folks that are with him, what do? The members of the Sanhedrin. What's your text say? Huh?
They call it blasphemy?
No, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. We're in the heat of this moment. This cohort's come up to Jesus, presumably to arrest him. Jesus steps up. Jesus says, who are you looking for? They say, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus looks and says, I am he.
They drew back and fell to the ground.
They fell to the ground. So you got, see you got this Jewish bunch here. They're very familiar with that language, okay? And when they hear it, all right, they fall to the ground, all right? I don't know whether that's because they recognize Jesus as Lord or because just the language of I am is such that they fall to the ground. But they fall to the ground. I take it they gather themselves. They struggle up. Well, we got over that. Judas is standing with them. So when he said, and he says to them again, he says, I am he. They drew back, fell to the ground. Therefore he again asked them, whom do you seek? And they said, Jesus the Nazarene. Jesus said, I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these go their way. And the point there is, Jesus steps out front. and he, in a very real way, protects his family, protects his disciples. Right? So we've got Jesus arrested there. He's put in his handcuffs, whatever. And they take him, very interestingly, they do not take him to the high priest. They don't take him to the high priest. Now, we're nighttime. It's nighttime. Hey, what do y'all do at night? I go to sleep, all right? So I'm thinking this is all cooked up, it's all prepared, and they take him to Annas, who is the retired high priest. Why do they take him to Annas? Just a question. Why, if you got this problem with Jesus, are you going to take him to Annas as opposed to Caiaphas, who is the guy that can do the official stuff? Why would they take him to Annas? Well, this is interesting. I read this. I believe this. This sounds pretty neat to me. That Jewish custom, Jewish trials were such that the person on trial was not the one that spoke. They relied upon the witness of two people, and if they had the witness of two people that they believed, then they would convict a person upon that, okay? What better witness could you have to convict a person of a problem than the ex-high priest? What better witness could you have? So we've got Annas, and Annas, who he thinks he's pretty sharp, he sits down and he starts asking Jesus some questions, all right? Verse 19. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples, about his teaching. Jesus answered, I have spoken openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. And I spoke nothing in secret. Why do you question me? Question those who have heard what I spoke to them, and they know what I said. And he finished saying that, and one of the heavies, one of the enforcers, slaps Jesus right in the face. Is that the way you answer the high priest? And Jesus answered him, if I've spoken wrongly, testify of the wrong. But if rightly, why do you strike me? Now, this story right here is it's an interesting story to me. I've never read it this way. Never been taught this. But again, Jesus is being interrogated inappropriately because the custom, the way that they did it was the guy that's being accused, you don't go asking him questions. You ask people that know around him. You ask him the questions, and they give the answers as to what they've seen. And all Jesus is saying is, why are you asking me these questions? Why are you asking me? Go ask the people who have heard me teaching. I've taught openly. I don't have secrets. I've spoken in synagogues. I've spoken out. You've seen me. Ask those people. Why do you hit me? Why would you hit me? Because all I'm doing is what you think we ought to do. I'm just following the rules. You guys aren't. What's Annas' response to all that? Annas says, what?
He sent him to Caiaphas.
Yeah, Annas says, he's scratching his head. I can't handle this guy.
They tied him up first.
They did tie him up, yeah. But you're right. I mean, so again, this may not mean a lot to you, but what I hear is Jesus in a time of what would be incredible stress to me. You're getting ready to be killed, and he knows it. He is absolutely large and in charge by John's testimony here. He is in control. Annas, he brings him before Annas. Annas is going to take charge. He's going to question this guy. He's going to collect the data. Then he's going to go and testify against him. Jesus doesn't let that happen. Doesn't let that happen. So they sent him to Annas. Send him to Caiaphas, I'm sorry. My Bible has paragraphs and each has headings. And one of the things that I noticed that I want you to notice again, and how John writes this, is that you'll have this scene depicted of Jesus being interrogated, and interwoven in that is a scene from Peter. And how is Peter reacting to the stress of the moment? Huh? So we got the denial taking place. And it's very, very interesting to me that, I mean, it's not just, so if Peter's just cut this guy's ear off, one of the persons that he denies that he knows Christ is, I think it's a relative of Malchus, okay? But now the first person is just this little slave girl at the gate. What's little slave? And he denies for a little slave girl. He's quite the opposite of Jesus, isn't he? He's hardly in control. So there's not a whole lot, I don't think, about the Caiaphas thing, but presumably when they go to Caiaphas, Caiaphas sends them on to what they call the Praetorium, I believe is where it is, okay? Now, the Praetorium was built, I think, by Herod the Great. And it's where the soldiers hung out. So Romans took that kind of came the Roman, what would it be called? Where do soldiers hang out?
Barracks.
Kind of the Roman barracks. Good word. They wouldn't go into the Praetorium because they don't want to get themselves unclean. So they have this conversation with Pilate. What kind of person was Pilate? Anybody know anything about Pilate? Got any impressions about Pilate?
Kind of like a governor,
Huh?
a governor who was afraid of the people a little bit, but also wanted to, probably afraid of Caesar also.
He what now?
Afraid of Caesar also.
He's politically ambitious.
Yeah. So how did Pilate get his spot? How do you get a spot in government at that time?
It's who you know.
Who you know, you kind of got to suck up to somebody in the Roman government. And there are people that believe that Pilate's favorite was Titus. I got that right? Anyway, he's got a honey bear up in Rome, okay? Kind of keeps him in with it. But meanwhile, Pilate was known at that time as being somebody who was fairly rigid with control. The big deal the Romans had was, we want control. The uprisings, we're going to shut them down. What was the biggest cause of uprising, you think, among the Jewish people?
Taxes.
Taxes, that was a cause, certainly. But who would have led, what kind of uprisings would they have had, do you think? Hey, I'm not sure how to answer my own questions. There are people periodically that will rise up and they choose, they're kind of like self-appointed messiahs. We know there's a history of people who claim to be messiahs within that time, okay? And guess what happened to them all?
They died.
Yeah, they died, all right. They died. And most of those folks died with crucifixion also. We know that.
But I think Jerusalem would have been, for Pilate, somebody in his position, I think Jerusalem would have been a hard place to govern and keep uprisings at a minimum, because that is the seat of the Jewish faith. And the Jewish people would have said, God is our king. God is over us. We don't want you over us. And they would have fought that for their religious freedom.
Yeah.
And because they would have not wanted to have this other country, this other government
Yeah.
over them.
So there's an incredible Jewish fervor
Yeah.
and basically demand that they be Jewish, enough that they go out and kill themselves.
Right.
I mean, we know, you think about flash forward years and Masada,
Right,
those stories. I mean, they'd rather die
yeah.
as to be
Mhm.
under a Roman yoke that stretched their deepest religious convictions, okay?
So I can see why Pilate would be very strict on his governance of that area.
And we also know, but we know that the Romans in trying to get a hold of get along with the Jewish people, they did provide some amends to what the Jewish people could do. I mean, you still have the Sadducees, we still have the council, that's basically a ruling group of Jews. And they have their laws that they're able to maintain and enforce. The one thing that they could not do was kill. Capital punishment was in the hands of the Romans. Jews couldn't do that. And what is it that the Jews want to do here?
They want to kill Jesus.
They do want to kill him. I mean, they're not going to put him in jail, they want to kill him. So in order to accomplish that, you've got to involve the Romans in that, don't you? Specifically, you got to involve Pilate. So they take him before Pilate. Verse 33, Pilate enters the praetorium, summons Jesus, and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews? Are you the king of the Jews?" Wonder where he got that idea, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Wonder where he got the idea to even ask him, "Are you the king of the Jews?"
Well, the
The
Jews,
Jews reported it.
yeah.
Yeah, so the Jews are saying he says he's the king of the Jews, all right? I got to believe that. And why would the Jews report him as king of the Jews?
It makes them an insurrectionist.
It makes him an insurrectionist. Who was the last king that the Jews had? Herod. The last king they had. So it's been a while, 30 years. Jesus answers, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" Jesus sees straight through that, doesn't he? Again, John's depicting Jesus. Jesus knows what's going on, and Jesus is in control. Pilate answers, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would be fighting so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not of this realm." How does that set with Pilate? Think Pilate knows what in the world he's talking about? Therefore Pilate said to him, "So you are a king." Jesus answered, "You say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice. And then Pilate answers, "What is truth? What is truth?" Pilate, you get ready to figure it out, buddy. When he'd said this, he goes after the Jews and says to them, I can't find any guilt in this guy. I don't see what it is that you all are so upset about. Why would you want to kill this guy? I don't get it. But I see that y'all are really having a fit. So here's how I'm going to handle this. I'm going to release a criminal because it's our custom. I'm going to release a criminal. So who is it that I should release? Should I release Jesus, King of the Jews, that I think is innocent? Or should I release this absolute hellraiser that you all know ought to be in here? You all know he ain't worth living. cried out again, saying, "No, don't release Jesus, but Barabbas." And it says Barabbas was a robber, but the translation I had was robber. He more than a robber.
Revolutionary is what.
Revolutionary.
Yeah.
So Pilate, he thought he had it figured out. Thought he could manipulate these Jewish leaders. Goes in, there's Jesus. Pilate's angry. He's angry. Jesus is causing him some real headaches right now. You know that? So when a guy's causing you headaches, what do? You're mad. Who you take it out on? Jesus. So they send him off and they whip him. This is something else that's interesting. Again, this is something I read that's just new to me. So with the Romans, there's 3 levels of whoopings. Okay? 3 levels. Whoop 1, whoop 2, whoop 3. That's Southern translation of some Latin words. Okay? Whoop 1, smack a guy over the back 4 or 5 times. It hurts. It hurts. Whooping 2, you smack him over 6 or 7 times, it hurts worse. Whoop 3, you just about can kill the guy. In fact, it was documented that there were people that were whipped. The Roman historian Josephus, in some of his writings, he writes of 2 different cases. He writes of a man who was whipped to the point that they saw his bones. That's a bad whipping. Talked about another person that was whipped to the point where he saw his entrails. And I can imagine that if you take a whip and if you put bones on the end of the scourge, so that when you whip somebody, it tears their flesh. And it was said that that was a common thing that you did to people before they were crucified. That was a common thing that you did before they were crucified. In fact, there were those that because they were whipped so hard, and lost blood, that they lost strength such they could not carry their cross. Does that remind you of anybody? Yeah, they couldn't carry the cross because they were whipped so bad. Well, evidently, what the commentator wrote that I read was that this whooping was a whooping 1 and not the whooping 3. So Jesus whips him, or Pilate whips him, and goes back in and again talks to Jesus, gets nowhere, and comes back out, and it sounds to me like he near begs the people. Okay, look, this guy's innocent. What do you want? And what's the response? The response is crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. Just an interjection here. The commentary that I'm using on this makes it clear here. He makes it very, very clear that Jesus and his death is led by a group that includes Jews, Romans, whatever. And he says his point is to make to take an anti-Semitic statement based upon this would be wrong. These are Jewish leaders that are leading it, specifically leaders of the Sanhedrin, and the Roman government's involved as well. So anyway, Pilate is really scratching his head. And the Jews say, we have a law, and by that law he ought to die because he made himself out to be the Son of God. So here's this religious argument that the Jews are putting forth about why Jesus should be killed. Well, how good is a religious argument, do you think, to Pilate? How much water do you think a religious argument holds when you're trying to work with Pilate?
Very little.
You think Pilate gives one hoot or holler about what their religious views really are? No, anything that he's allowed has been just basically for political reasons, to keep things quiet, keep things reasonable. So Pilate hears this, he's afraid. He goes back into the praetorium, said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" Jesus doesn't answer. Pilate said to him, "You're not speaking to me. Do you not know that I have authority to release you, and I have authority to crucify you? I'm the big cheese in here. I'm loaded up with all the authority." And Jesus answers. This smacks right here. This is a real put down on Pilate. Jesus says, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given to you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." Now, some people question, who is that that's got the greater sin? Is that Caiaphas? Is it Annas? Who is it? Is it Judas? I can't answer that. I don't know. As a result of Jesus saying this, though, Pilate made efforts to release him. But the Jews, they cry out something else. Here's their second argument. Listen to this. "If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes himself out to be a king opposes Caesar." Is that a religious comment or is that a political comment? So we got all these religious people right here at Passover, and religious arguments aren't working. So the true them starts coming out, right? This is no religious argument. This is purely a political argument. So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, "Behold your king." So they cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said, "Shall I crucify your king?" Now here's the thing that really implicates these Jewish leaders. This is the statement that absolutely nails them for who they are. The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Who was the king to a Jew? How about no gods before you? How about there'll be no other kings? Whatever. It's drilled in them for 30 generations back. Okay, and here they say, they come out in their heat of the moment, under their stress, and they say exactly who they are and what they think. Okay, a very political comment. We have no king but Caesar. Yeah.
I was reading, and I don't remember where I read this, but I was reading that Pilate had to justify to his superiors all the crucifixions,
Yeah.
and that he had to list what crimes these people had committed, like in his report,
Yeah.
and that he was going to have a hard time
Yeah.
justifying Jesus' crucifixion, and that according to this author, was why he kept trying to release Jesus, because he knew he was going to have a difficult time in his report justifying it.
I think that's interesting. I think there's some truth to that. I mean, we see Pilate here. We got a whole chapter basically given to Pilate trying to talk the Jews out of what it is they want. First he tries to release somebody really bad. Comes back to them. No. And then they finally wind up with, again, they show their colors. It's a political statement. He is a seditionist. He wants to be king. John's got things simplified, but I'm sure Caiaphas has sat down with him and said, look here, Pilate. This guy's a whole lot bigger threat than you think. He's got people following him right now, and they're being armed. They're being armed because there's this big revolution that's coming on, and they're getting ready to try to nail you right here. And you know what Rome's going to think about that.
Ironic.
Isn't it though?
Because that's really what the Jewish leaders want from the Messiah anyway.
Yes, isn't it? I mean, that's, again, the way that John writes, and what I've learned from this study is John writes in a way where you understand that. If you really know, if you can, in retrospect, see what's going on, you see how Jesus has just got them. And the thing is, they keep saying things that are real, but for all the wrong reasons. All right, so they take Jesus, they take him out to Golgotha, the place of the skull, and they crucify him with 2 thieves on either side. And they put above Jesus, not they, Pilate demands they put a sign above Jesus. And it says, King of the Jews. King of the Jews. Hey, you guys, that's what you said he was? That's what he is. They don't like that, do they? They come back and they say, no, he's not, that sign shouldn't say King of the Jews. That sign should say, he says he's King of the Jews. Right?
But he also did it in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek to make sure absolutely everybody that saw it understood what he was being
Yeah.
labeled.
Yeah, so Pilate does it for the reason that everybody will recognize and shame the Jews and see that crucifixion, all right? John records that, and what comes of that? What might we say is the meaning of that being in 3 different languages? Who is the crucifixion for? Who is Jesus there for? He's there for everybody. Everybody. So everybody gets that note. So again, wrong reason for putting it up there, but God's will, what God wants known is known. I find that very interesting. So the next thing to have is the soldiers, and they're dividing his garments. There's this thing about, I thought, verse 23 talks about a tunic being seamless, woven in one piece. They said to one another, let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to decide who will get it. This fulfills Scripture. They divided my outer garments among them, for my clothing they cast lots. Now, I didn't know what to make of that. So I read a little bit about that. So what I get is this tunic that they don't tear up, that's one piece. It's either Leviticus or Deuteronomy, something about inner clothes, you don't mix types. So the fact that it's all made in one part distinguishes it as made from one thing, not 2 combined garments. And the second thing I thought about when I read this thing, did they wear underwear back then?
The high priest did.
I wondered that very thing. So they've got this outer garment, but then they've got this inner garment that's evidently very nice, and they don't rip that in 4 parts. They instead I guess they draw lots, they gamble, whatever it is, to see who gets that. And then you've got this scene at the cross. You've got Jesus on the cross, and John depicts some people that are standing there. His mother's sister, Mary Magdalene, and Jesus, who has been too weak to carry his cross, that presumably has lost a tremendous amount of blood, presumably is hypotensive. You got to believe that. Maybe early shock when you expect. But Jesus looks up and he sees his mother. And he says to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Wonder how Mary was supposed to take that. Yes.
I have a question about that.
course.
or sister.
Yeah, I just would have thought that, and I'm just curious why. I mean, I know he loved John and that, but I just thought one of his brothers would have taken on that responsibility to care for his mother.
Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." From that hour the disciple took her into his own household.
Yeah.
We believe that was John, right?
Yeah, I just don't know
Yeah.
why one of the brothers wouldn't have.
Well, what I have been told in the past, and what I read last night, was there's a strong belief that John had kinship with Jesus' family. So there was more than just a relationship of he's a disciple who I love and I'm very close to. There was also some kinship there.
Oh, okay.
That's what I read. And, yeah,
Isn't there also a thought that there was some strain between Jesus and his brothers, early, especially at this point in time? And then later on, James, I guess, sort of came around. So maybe at that point, the family was kind of strained.
yeah, Paul, I mean, I would not disagree with that. In fact, I would wonder if your brother is getting crucified on the cross and one of his closest associates, Peter, has denied him, that if you weren't a real big believer in Jesus, hadn't gotten into who Jesus was, you might want to be about 40 miles from that place, for fear that they may identify you as one of the followers of an insurrectionist. I don't know. I think it's a good thought. Well, so how do they? How does crucifixion go? Got to spend just a little time on crucifixion. And, hey, I think sometimes we have in the Lord's Supper, and I've heard people preach on crucifixion before. I've heard people get up and talk 60 minutes about people being crucified, and you're sitting there just the whole time. I mean, like it's just this horror film that you just seem not sit through. And there have been plenty of people that have been killed and tortured in horrible, horrible ways. So I don't want to dwell exclusively on that. What I do want us to all consider is the fact that it was a horrible death, and that Jesus knew it was a horrible death. And Jesus stepped into that horrible death knowing exactly what it was all about. I'm confident that Jesus had seen crucifixion. I'm confident that he had. I'm confident that he had. But the process of crucifixion, as I read it, first the pictures, we've got a big high stake in the area with a cross on it. And Jesus is up on a hill so everybody can see he's elevated. In fact, you'd have to get a ladder to get to him, right? Well, what this commentator said was in most cases it wasn't a big old high thing. In fact, people to be crucified were just raised somewhat off the ground, a couple feet off the ground. The other thing that he said was that the stake was already in the ground. And so what the person that was going to be crucified had to carry, which is the crossbeam. So they carried the crossbeam, and they talk about how they put it over his shoulders and basically tied his hands to it. That's how he got up there. People could be either nailed to the cross or tied to the cross. A lot just kind of depended on how you wanted people to die. If you hang for so long in that position, you get where your diaphragm just won't work, and so you suffocate. So it's
And remember, you've been beaten. So
yes,
you're-
yes. So you're already bleeding. You're already beaten. And hey, and John doesn't have it, but the others do, and that is that Jesus did have a second beating before he went in there. Okay, that was the beating class 3. So you die by either suffocation or you die by blood loss. I'm not sure how she would die on a cross. I'm not sure how she'd do that. I guess the real problem is when, for whatever reason, you're not heavy enough And so they've got this stake that they set, that you can literally sit on, that's between your legs, where you can kind of periodically kind of stretch yourself up. Otherwise, the fear is that people would fall off and just pull themselves off. But in Jesus' situation, what we have is somebody who was nailed, I would say tied and nailed. And then the feet, and the depiction of most feet that I've seen in art is the feet are down with the nail through the anterior portion of the ankle. All right? But what this commentator says is more common was laid to the side and a common nail put through both. Right? I don't know, that just gets pretty hard. But bottom line is, some people actually seem to survive that for an extended period of time. And so when they were going to survive that, or appeared they were going to survive, how did they shorten those lives?
Break their legs.
Yeah, go in and break their legs. Well, so they break the guy's legs on either side, but they come to Jesus, and Jesus is dead. Now, that's another story about being dead at that time and how you pronounce somebody dead. How do you know that people are dead? Where's medical science at that point in time that you know somebody's dead? Well, you know, we talk about ABC, all right? No blood pressure. They had no blood pressure monitors. Pulse, they didn't know what a pulse was, I don't think. They could see a person wasn't breathing. They could see that. But again, people can breathe really shallow. You don't really know. But they presume Jesus was dead. But there's a guy there who's not quite sure whether he is or he isn't, just wants to make sure. So what's he do? Sticks a spear in it. And out of the spear, John writes that blood and fluid come out. So people talk about how is that anatomically, medically, what's going on right there. All kinds of explanations. We're talking about somebody who's been on the cross, in Jesus' case, less than 24 hours. What happens during that time? Well, Ralph, you got an idea?
Well, I think he had, pleural edema from
Yeah.
just hanging up there, and that's the fluid.
So people talk about he had a big old pleural effusion.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just between your lungs and your chest wall. Some people accumulate fluid right there. So that'd be water. Yeah.
I think, in this case, they had to get them down before Passover started, right, or
That's what
there was a certain time, but,
Jews want to clean that up before Passover because we want Passover to be really nice and sacred, right?
but they crucified people all the time, right? So there were people that were allowed to be on a cross for days and days.
Extended times.
Yeah, so that was the reason that they came back and broke the legs. They had to hurry and get people
Try to get it
off the
done.
cross.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, you get this blood and water. John records that. They take Jesus down. What happens? What do you think happened to common murderers crucified? What happened to their bodies? What do you think happened?
Common grave.
Huh?
Common grave.
Common grave?
May just let you know.
They left a lot of them up there, Raph. They left a lot of them up there for carrying to take care of, and that's further message, right? Just leave them hanging there for a while. That'll give a really good message. But if you were a common person, took them down, and there's a dump not far from where we're talking about right here. I don't know whether they went up with the dump and their bodies were burned. I don't know what happened to them. John makes it very clear that Jesus, and what happened to Jesus' body was regal. Jesus, in fact, at his burial, was treated like a king. You got two guys that John depicts, Nicodemus, and what's the other guy's name?
Joseph of Arimathea.
Joseph of Arimathea. Who John depicts them as guys that had been kind of quiet, kind of walking the shadows because they were afraid. Right? And here they've got Jesus is killed. They're kind of starting to come out. Right? In my mind, John is teaching us right there. People are going to start getting it. People are going to start understanding. This is kind of the first. These are the people that before, they know Jesus is real, but they're afraid to really get out and show their faith. Respect that. He's got two of them come out. And very interesting, John says that there's this catacomb, what's he call it? Cave? What is it? Got this burial cave, and people that had wealth back then, you've got this cave, and I'm gonna take it that it's pretty rocky, and on either side of it, they got this shelf. They come in to lay the body down, anoint it with some sort of something. And in this case, John makes it clear, they got all kinds of anointment of ointments and smell good stuff and whatever else there for Jesus. They wrap his body, prepare for burial. I don't know, I didn't read enough how long they did, but typically what they do is then they would take that body and they would put it in a dugout area, and it would be there for years and years until it had rotted. Okay, then they would take that, what was left, the bones, put it in a ossuary box, and set that box down. Okay. This grave had nobody in it. This was a new grave. This is what you did for wealthy kings. They laid his body there. In the place where he was crucified, there was a garden. And in the garden, a new tomb in which no one had yet been laid. There before, because of the Jewish day of preparation, since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there. So next week, we'll
Week
celebrate.
after next,
Huh?
week after next.
So next week, we will celebrate Easter together.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Then the next week, Seal, we'll talk about his resurrection a week after the fact, okay? Y'all have a great week. Have a great week. Enjoy the beautiful weather. Again, thank you for all your prayers.